In this episode of the Mama Podcast, we are joined by Natalie Costa, a child and parenting coach who runs Power Thoughts. We discuss how to support children with their emotional well-being, the impact of COVID, and parenting strategies, as there is no parental manual. We hope you find it helpful.
Okay, I'm delighted to introduce Natalie Costa. She is a coach for children and parents. Welcome, Natalie.
Hello, and thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here today.
Thank you so much. And of course, co-host Heidi is here too. Let's start with you then, Natalie. Can you tell us just a bit about your background and your setup at home?
Yeah, sure. So I am the founder of Power Thoughts, which is a coaching service that I created initially to help children tap into the power of their own thoughts, giving them the tools and the awareness to know that, I don't have to believe every thought I think. I don't have to respond to all these feelings that I feel. But over time, it's definitely, my work also involves supporting parents and caregivers, because we also have big feelings as adults. And for many of us, we weren't maybe modeled or taught how to regulate our emotions. And so, as I say to parents, these are skills that you're learning yourself, but it's skills that you're also trying to teach your child. Prior to this, I was a primary school teacher for over about 14 years. So I spent a lot of time in year one, nursery, reception, and then moved to, all the other year groups. And I've spent a lot of time with children. So over the course of Power Thoughts, I've worked with about 40,000 children. So I think I've got an extensive experience of stepping into their world. Obviously not all one-to-ones. I do a lot of school workshops and so forth. But I love it, and I really enjoy being able to give children the tools that I wish I had learned as a child. And I know many parents echo that as well, saying, when I teach that, when I work with their children, it's like, I wish I'd learned this. I'm having to learn this for myself as well. So, yeah.
Wow. So is that what inspired you to go from primary school teacher to the coaching?
Well, yeah, a little bit of a join the dots. So I was actually always inspired by human development and understanding why people behave the way that they do. So I'm from South Africa. And I was never really sure what I wanted to do. And teaching was one of the options that had come up. So however, in my first year of teaching, I realized actually psychology is the route that I want to go down. But I decided to do my psychology degree alongside the teaching degree. So I did that for about three years. And then I got qualified as a teacher, and out of interest, but also laziness, because I wasn't ready to get a job in the big wide world, I was like, let me apply for my honors in psychology and stay at home for another year. But that I absolutely loved. And then that got me on this journey of, could I become an educational psychologist? But I decided to then, after the honors, take a break and actually use my degree, my teaching degree. So that led me to come over to the UK. I taught for a couple of years. And that's really when I was starting to think, do you know what? I love the psychology kind of background that I have, but I'm not quite sure if that's the route I want to go down. So initially I dabbled a bit within the fitness industry, because I wasn't happy as a teacher, more just around obviously the paperwork and all the boxes you have to tick, and I wasn't doing what I wanted to do. So initially I thought, well, let me become a fitness instructor. And it was actually when I was still teaching at a school, doing fitness classes on the side, that the head teacher said to me, oh, we found this coaching course, this PE coaching, you like your physical education. So it's a taste, it's that. But it was actually a taster to life coaching or performance coaching. And I was like, oh my goodness, okay, this ticks the box. So I then did that part-time. And it was then during that process, after I qualified, I'm like, well, what do I now do with this coaching qualification? And I was working actually with a group of year sixes. So that's here in the UK, they children that go from primary to secondary. They were really stressed out about going to secondary school, about their 11 plus exams, and many of them doing school interviews. And it just dawned on me, I was like, why are we not teaching children about their thoughts? Because one particular boy, I'll never forget, said to me, Miss, I've got this school interview, but I'm boring. I've got nothing interesting to say because so-and-so said to me ages ago, I'm boring. And that's really where I was like, wow, this is a story that he can keep with him if we don't kind of nip it in the bud now, and I could relate to that because I had the story I carried with myself that I'm uncool and that, I'm one of the weird ones, the one that doesn't quite fit in. And it that's really what made me think there is nothing in that I could see at that point around really tapping into thoughts and mindset and alongside emotional regulation. And that really then sparked the idea of power thoughts and supporting children, giving them what I wanted. Actually, and then adding to that, Heidi, I also really struggled with anxiety as a little girl. Probably from about 7 or 8, I used to call them my worries. And so even more so, why I could really relate to what some of these children were saying. And it was only much later, through psychology and then the coaching, that I was like, why has nobody ever taught me this? I don't actually have to believe all the stuff I'm telling myself, it's not true. And so that was a big driving factor behind what I do now as well.
I wish more of this was covered in the curriculum, actually, at school, because obviously they have their academic things that they have to learn, but to learn about feelings and thoughts and emotions, and especially anxiety. So much of the population suffers with anxiety these days. And I think children are probably more exposed to it off the back of COVID. You mentioned children in year 6. This is so personal to me because I have a 10-year-old who is in year 6. And she's really suffering at the moment. She suffers very, very badly with anxiety. So if I take her anywhere to a new place where there's different people, she will cling to me for at least an hour and a half to 2 hours before she will then be able to let go of my hand and interact with other children. And her emotional ability, I would say, is of a 3-year-old. Even though she's 10, she still has tantrums. She finds it hard to share. She seems to want to be negative about everything. Everything is no. I still have a battle with her in the morning to get her up for school. We have the same routine every morning. Put your clothes on, brush your hair, brush your teeth. And it's always a huge battle. And I've only recently been brave enough to talk about this to other parents, and actually they've got similar experiences, and so suddenly I don't feel so isolated and alone and embarrassed anymore, because this seems to be a bit of an issue for quite a lot of parents out there. But for me, I don't know where to start. I know she needs some help, and I know I need some help on how to get her to talk about her feelings and emotions, because she just can't. Every time I ask her questions, she just either doesn't respond at all, or she'll say to me, I don't know. My friend recommended some mood cards, which I've now got for her, but to be perfectly honest, I don't know where to start with them. I don't know what to do with them. So when you were coming onto this podcast, I was like, oh, this could be something that's really interesting, and you might be able to help us parents in getting our children to talk and explore their feelings and getting them to handle them better.
And I think, you're definitely not alone. And thank you for sharing that, because I think it can be really isolating when, the parents I work with, the challenges that you face, and then, but what's the matter? It's only me. Am I doing something wrong? Where am I going wrong in this? And it can be really, it is isolating. And I think actually the more we shine a light on it and talk about these challenges, because I hear this all the time and it's very common. And so to say, you touched there as well, I think, anxiety, I've definitely seen, the emotional resiliency of children is different now to what it was prior to COVID. So, for all those years as being a classroom teacher, and then obviously I started Power Thoughts and prior to COVID as well. But we have to understand that, there were at least a good 2.5 years that children, those everyday bumps and challenges that children would face. So the everyday transitions, the everyday separations from you, the fallout with their friend, the mistakes they made, all those like little things, that's not a big deal, but they all add up to kind of build that muscle of like emotional resiliency, helping them to learn to tolerate uncomfortable emotions. So for a long period of time that was taken away. They're very comfortable then being with us. For many parents, children with us 24/7. So now, coming out of the back end of that, yes, you've got a 10-year-old, but I'd often say, that emotional resiliency, it's at least 2.5 years back. So we have to take a bit of that bird's eye perspective of we've, you know, I mean, I still think we sometimes still in COVID, as you know, we're still going through the aftermath of that. We're not back to where we were. I think many of us are struggling. But it's just taking that bird's eye view of actually, okay, there's a much bigger thing at play here. We'll absolutely get through it. Like, you know, I'm preaching doom and gloom, but it's managing our expectations there. The other thing also to bear in mind is when it comes to things like transitioning, when it comes to separation, when it comes to flexibility, when it comes to getting ready, so, you know, being organized, getting ready, when it comes to tolerating frustration and difficult emotions, all of those things are executive functioning skills of the prefrontal cortex of the brain. Now, the prefrontal cortex is the last part of the brain to be developed. You know, and research has shown that it's only fully developed by the age of our mid-20s. So all of those things that we think they should do, you shouldn't be so clingy, you should be able to organize yourself. I mean, I was doing a group call just before this about, you know, my child should be able to get himself out of the house on time. Shifting that should to skill. She still needs to develop the skill of being more independent. She still needs to develop the skill of being organized, because those are, that part of her brain that's responsible for those skills isn't fully developed. It's the same as if I say to the two of you, you know, right, I expect you to speak, I don't know, fluent Afrikaans within a week's time, and hoping you can't. Like, that's by the time and then I'm like, but why aren't you? But what's the matter with you? But you should be able to, but you should, but come on, you've got to speak quick. You simply can't, because you haven't developed the skills yet. And so we have to, as parents and caregivers, it's be that substitute prefrontal cortex for them. And that means we've got to coach, we've got to guide, we've got to show. But that's where it becomes really tricky, because our uncomfortable emotions appear. We feel helpless. We feel frustrated. We're impatient. And of course, because we're human beings, you're not robots. But it's for many of us as adults, we were not taught or guided or shown how to work with difficult emotions, or how to tolerate them, or how to sit with them. We want to fix. We want to, like, well, it shouldn't be like, let's fix this. It shouldn't have this. Let's fix this. Versus, okay, you know what? Let me sit with this helpless feeling I have right now. Like, hand on my heart, deep breath. This is really hard. No wonder I'm finding this hard, because it's really difficult feeling like I can't help her. And it's okay for me to feel like that. It doesn't make me a bad mum. It doesn't mean that, you know, that there's anything wrong with me or my parenting. This is a normal thing to have. And I will get through this. Okay, let me sit with that feeling. But that's the uncomfortable bit, because we're not being taught how to sit with that. We want to fight against it. And yes, of course, you know, there's many year 6s and year 7s and year 8s at the moment that I'm working with, older children that you'd think wouldn't suffer with separation anxiety are really struggling. Now, I mean, I'm not a doctor, but I really do see an increase in that since COVID versus before COVID, where it was more, you know, my experience was it was a lot of younger kids. But it's okay, seeing this as, okay, these are skills we need to help her develop, skills to help her develop, learning to work through tricky feelings, learning to work through that uncomfortable feeling, skills to develop emotional regulation for herself and for me, right? I need to develop this as well. But also these are skills to help develop that transition and slowly build those confidence muscles over time. And one of the things, you know, I think when it comes to the emotions, and I've shared this quite a bit over like on socials, is about befriending those feelings. So seeing those feelings as just visitors, they come and they go. And just like I've got excitement, I've got joy, I've got worry, I've got boredom, I've got anger. So normally what I do with children when we say run anxiety, it is about, okay, well, let's create a character of this anxiety. So one of the girls I actually worked with ages ago, she called hers eggplant. Okay, when does eggplant make its appearance, right? So I know it's eggplant on a Sunday night, and you know it's going to be there when I do PE, but I might not notice it when I'm playing with my friend down the road. So you can then start to address it. Oh, it looks like we've got a visitor here. Eggplant's here. What do you think it's trying to tell you? Where do you feel eggplant in your body? But you come up with your own version of that. Where do I notice worry in my body? Is it heavy? Is it light? And when we can personify those feelings, it also helps us then, and for children, to begin to recognize, I can feel the feeling, but I don't need to be the feeling. And okay, eggplant's visiting us now, but we also know that, you know, I don't know, Fruity Loopy, whatever, the happy feeling is going to come visit me a little bit later on as well. But it's when we can have these conversations with our children, and even if they don't want to do it, you do it. And you said, you know, I've been thinking, I sometimes feel really worried, and I've learned this exercise, then I'm going to actually create a character of my worry. And this is where I feel my worry. And actually, this is when I notice worry and it feels heavy. Okay, I'm just going to sit with it for a bit and like breathe, you know, deep, you know, we do regulatory tools, breathe into it. And so even when you're doing that and you're modeling it, that's how they learn. And also when we hold, you know, when we can start to look at some of these tricky feelings and we're just asking questions about, okay, let's sit with it. One of my favorite questions actually is, we don't always get an answer, but I have had some insightful answers from kids, is, you know, if your worry could speak, what would it say to you? Or what does your, you know, what does eggplant want you, what does he need most help with right now? What's he struggling with or she struggling with? Because when you're just taking time to sit in it without fixing it, you're also showing them it's okay to feel this feeling. I don't need to be alone in this. And you're teaching them how to tolerate those uncomfortable feelings versus trying to suppress or deny. So, I mean, those are a few starting points. I've realized I've been talking about 5 minutes flat. So I hope that provides some food for thought.
No, absolutely. That's really, really helpful. That's absolutely fascinating. And I think for me, it's hard because I've got a 13-year-old son as well, who's complete opposite. So this has been a real challenge for me to have a child that's just so different.
And that's very common. One is completely the opposite to the other one. And I know we've, you know, I don't know if you've come across it, but I've definitely come across it, but I always, and sometimes it can be really triggering, so compassion, but it is, okay, what is this relationship teaching me right now? What this situation of her struggling with this, what is it highlighting to me, maybe where I need to grow in terms of maybe my patience, in terms of me. So often, not, you know, putting a blanket on, but so often it comes to, okay, how can I expand my window of tolerance for this uncomfortable emotion that I'm feeling right now? But it's tough. And that's where compassion for yourself is really important.
So powerful, isn't it? Do you, in terms of the generational shift, because I guess, I don't want to make assumptions, but we're all kind of similar age, and the way we brought up was very different. And, you know, obviously our parents very different to that in terms of like keeping a stiff upper lip. And now we like are starting to talk about emotions. And, you know, I think us three are probably quite empathetic with that. But do you see a real generational shift? And how do you help parents who are perhaps find it less easy to talk about emotions with their children?
Definitely. And it is, you know, I mean, I'm being very generalized here, but the families that tend to come to me, if we're looking at how they were raised, and I'm putting myself in this bucket as well, like we're coming, you know, parenting has changed over the generations, massively so. We're moving from that space where it was a strict authoritarian style of parenting, very fear-based, very fear-led, to this other extreme that I sometimes see now, you know, whether you want to call it gentle parenting or whatever that is. But and always in the confusion is, okay, but now what do I do? And I don't want to say the thing, and I don't want to say no, and actually, you know, it's, I think what I, for me personally, what I focus on is how can we parent and raise our children, whether you're a teacher, you know, you don't have to be a parent, but whether you're working with children, how can we raise our children from a space of empathy and compassion versus from a space of fear? And the challenge, yes, with many of the parents that I support is they do come from more of that fear-based, and not because, you know, their parents love them and it's, you know, our parents only did, I just want to say, parents only did the best that they could do with the knowledge that they had, right? And nobody is a perfect parent, and we're never going to get this right 100% because that's just unrealistic. But coming from that background, it's a real challenge. And that's what I've, you know, often say to parents, it's who taught you to regulate your emotions? Or how were you taught to regulate your emotions? Who taught you to really sit with a difficult feeling and not fix it? Who taught you about your thoughts? And it's not because our parents didn't love us, but they didn't have the skills, because it was probably suppressed or denied, or they were not feeling safe. They didn't feel safe to show those emotions. So we are trying to teach our children skills when it comes to emotional regulation, when it comes to talking about their feelings, but many adults haven't had that. And, make a bold statement, but just look at the world today, put on the news, and it's a very clear sign that a lot of grown-ups do not know how to deal with difficult feelings. And we're sitting in a mental health pandemic. And so it's because we've never just been taught how to work through them in a healthy way. So it very much is, I think, take that pressure off ourselves of, I've got to get it all right for my child. Children now, if they get access to this, they're really going to be miles, they're going to have so much more at their disposal when they're our age. But equally, you've got to have compassion for yourself of, I did the wrong, I quote unquote didn't do the right thing there. I could have dealt with that in a different way. But then the beauty is, okay, I can go back and repair. Because that's the other thing. How many of us have had our parents apologize to us when we were little, like, telling you what, maybe it happened, but Jen or teachers apologizing, that's never happened in my experience. Power of the apology. And do you know what, I'm really sorry. I got really angry then. I got shouty and I got so upset that I didn't even think of what was going on for you. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have shouted like that. Help me understand. It might feel really counterintuitive, but you're teaching your child how to own what they've done. You're also teaching them how to repair, and you're teaching them that it's safe to sit with this uncomfortable feeling of being vulnerable and whatever else those uncomfortable feelings might be. So that's what I'm saying. It's like the hardest job you're ever going to do, because there's no qualification for it.
That's for sure. Do you have any other successful strategies that you've seen parents do to really support their child's emotional well-being?
I think one of the key things is, how do we communicate with our children? And often there's this because now we're coming from this, but I don't want to parent my child the way I was parented. I want to give them a voice. I want to let them speak up. But then the flip side is, okay, but then there's no boundaries, because now, and also the guilt that comes onto that, because we briefly spoke about parent guilt. Maybe there's guilt because I'm not spending enough time with my children because I'm working, and therefore the boundaries are a bit relaxed. And it's hard holding boundaries, because you're on the receiving end of all those big blowouts and you just don't have the energy for it. But I think what is really important is that boundaries are key for children, because without boundaries, they don't feel safe. And actually, it can be quite anxiety provoking if there are no boundaries there, because you always feel like you're on eggshells. So whilst children might tell you they want to be in power, they really don't, because it's scary. They're looking to you to be that person in control. But the challenge is, how can we hold boundaries from a space of empathy and compassion versus fear? And that's the real challenge. And so communicating with our children, which will feel, does feel counterintuitive, because the natural tendency is, do as I say because I said so, or just fix this problem, or it's not so bad, don't worry, don't cry about it, especially because to your rational mind it's not a big deal if they're having a meltdown about, say, not being able to drink from their favorite blue cup, right, and the red cup's right there. But it is about the first, I think one of the key things we can do, and this is communication with all people in our lives, is really taking some time to connect with the emotional experience that person is having. Of do you know what, Toby, I get it. I get this is hard. I know I'm being super annoying because I'm telling you to do your homework again. I get it. And it's just so boring. This is really tough. Taking just some time to just meet them in that feeling, which you will not want to do, which feels so counterintuitive. It doesn't feel right. But when we can meet them in that space, then we're meeting them in that emotion that they're having. And then that starts to calm the defenses. It's the same as if, you've come to me, you're really upset. And I'm like, oh, just calm down. It's not a big deal. It never makes us calm, right? Because we don't feel validated. We don't feel seen, heard, or understood. So taking that initial time, and that comes up with anxiety, that comes with anger. it's because, again, you know, with anxiety, we want to fix it. We don't want to see our children struggling. But actually, like, do you know what? That sounds like it's really big. That sounds like there's a lot of big feelings here. Tell me a bit more. Or it must feel really overwhelming that that's happened to you. Help me understand. And again, when we do that, it just doesn't take the challenge away, but it just kind of brings things down a little bit. But that is a real skill. You know, and it's practice. But, you know, that's not just beneficial for kids. Think of your partners, you know, work colleagues, how often we get caught up in arguments, but actually if we just take some time to connect to that feeling, it lowers those defenses. Yeah.
It is interesting. I always try with my daughter Paloma. I mean, she's just about to turn 2, but whenever she's having a tantrum over, you know, I grabbed her lion instead of her cat, or like your analogy of passing the wrong cup. I always try and say, like, I know this is difficult for you. I can see it's challenging to regulate your emotions. My husband's always like, what are you talking and he just kind of like leaves her to it a little bit, and I'm like, no, I really want you to follow this. And I think he finds it quite strange. And sometimes when I'm down there, I don't know what to say either, because part of me wants to laugh and part of me wants to cry because you're in the middle of a supermarket.
And that's the challenge though, right? But I take it one step further there when you do meet her in like, oh, I know I took the lion, I didn't take the tiger. Oh, I'm so silly for doing that. Or mommy's so annoying for doing that. Like I always say, like, try and meet her on her radio frequency level with where she's at, versus, because sometimes we can go into that, like, oh, it must be really hard for you. I know. Like that customer service response, and you're like, you have no, do you know what I mean? So it really,
yeah,
like, you're just taking some time to you know, mirror back that emotion and that feeling that she's feeling. And yeah, I appreciate it's not always in the most convenient of spaces that these things are going to take place. Now, obviously, there are things that you can do outside of those moments to help and scaffold a bit more, because it's not just what we do in the moments, but what's taking place, you know, outside of those moments. And I would say, and this is a real challenge. I don't think there's going to be any parent that's going to be like, bring on a public meltdown, bring it on, I don't care. Like it's going to be uncomfortable. But the reality is, you know, you have to do what you feel is right for you and your child, versus what, you know, 10 other people around you might be thinking. And hopefully there are more compassionate mums around you or dads around you. Like whenever I go to the supermarket, you know, now I always feel really sorry for the poor mum or poor dad whose kids are having a meltdown, because it's really hard. Or you know what I mean? And it's just, I just think like that yes, that fear of judgment might be there. Actually, I don't know. Depends how much bandwidth you've got. You know, I'm tongue in cheek. Get out of the floor with her. Be like, do you know what? I hear you. It's okay. Let it out. You know, there's gonna be a bit of a seed. We're all right. I mean, you know, I'm not saying do that, but yeah, it's not easy at all.
Yeah, I'm quick to try and prevent as well. I'm not sure about you, Heidi, but I'm like, if she's asked for something and I can hear it in her voice that it's escalating, and Aaron's just like sat there, or like, I mean, he's very hands-on, but I'll be like, like screaming from downstairs, pass her the lion. She's just 5 steps from you.
I normally just remove her. We're in a different room, let her calm down for a little while. But that really is fascinating. I feel like I've got so much homework to do, and I'm going to be listening back to this podcast like over and over again. I really will be. Have you got any other advice for, you know, parents that could be really struggling right now and just don't know where to turn?
Yeah, I mean, golly, yeah, there's lots of areas. I think, do you know what? It might sound a bit counterintuitive, but one of the first things that came to mind when you said that is, I don't think there's, like, as parents and caregivers, you know, practicing self-compassion is something that kind of falls off the wayside. I think that, you know, from the conversations I have with a lot of parents, there's a lot of you know, guilt, shame, or blame, or Where am I going wrong with this? I could be doing more. And I think being really mindful of your own internal chatter and that own narrative that you're running. And I often encourage parents to keep an evidence list at the end of the day, like just what, so even if you had a massive, flip out with your child and you shouted at them and they shouted back at you, and then afterwards we go into the whole guilt spiral, at the end of the day, still fine. First of all, at the end of the day, just hold space for your own feelings there. Do you know what? That was really tough today. And no wonder I found it hard, because I'm learning to regulate my emotions as well. And this stuff is tough because it's hitting a lot of vulnerable things within me, and often I encourage parents sometimes to dig a bit deeper. What was it like for you as a child? Were you allowed to speak up, to back chat, to what were your experiences like? And what is it that little boy or little girl needed from their caregivers? And most, I'm not saying all the time, but many of the times it goes back to that we just wanted to feel seen, heard, and understood. So coming back to now, have compassion for yourself of, do you know what? I could have dealt with that better. I know that my child is actually still struggling and they're needing to build the skills. But no wonder this is hard for me, because I'm learning these skills as well. So I'm trying to do it for two people, for me and for my child. Because I think if we can start to exercise more compassion to ourselves, it doesn't take the challenges away, but it does shift how you then approach those challenges with more empathy and compassion. So I'd say, and going back to the evidence list being, even, if you think it was a really rubbish day, pick one or two things that you did that day that you did well in, that prove that you are a good mum, that you are a good dad, because you are. If you're listening to this podcast, you absolutely are, because you're wanting to learn, no matter how small that is, because we forget as well. I think, we can be our own worst critics, and those thoughts that we have influences how I feel, influences how I behave. And so we get caught up in this little cycle. And so really becoming aware of that, and, advocate for yourself. Do you know what? I should have done that differently. Okay, tomorrow. And, I often talk about planning ahead. Tomorrow, I know we're going to have this challenge again. Okay, how can I go in as just a 1% better version of myself? I'm going to regulate my emotions. I'm going to take a deep breath. I'm going to remind myself, if I have to, one of my clients said to me, I visualize my son walking around with half a brain, kind of like a piece, like a chunk missing. So she's like, I just visualize that. And that keeps me just grounded and regulated, not calm, because like we often say stay calm, but calm kind of gives you the impression I'm going to be zen, like I don't have any of these uncomfortable feelings. You're going to feel all of those like horrible feelings, but you're staying regulated, and that in itself is a skill. So I think if it's anything, if you're struggling, first look at, it sounds cheesy, but it's putting your own oxygen mask on. Okay, let me look at my own self-regulatory skills. I know I want my son to learn them, but if I'm just regulated, he's not going to stay calm. So what am I doing, or little things then that you could do, with other families. There's been like just a little things that made a difference. With the dad I was working with, is he said, he didn't realize the difference it was in terms of taking just a walk out around the lake with the pushchair and the pram to meet his friend. Like they do that a couple of times a week. He's like, on the days that he didn't do it, or there was a week gone by, I think it was during COVID. So his wife had COVID, and, and so forth. And he's like, that week was awful. But actually, when I was able to get out, it made such a difference. Because often, you put yourself on the bottom of the list because everybody else is important. All these things to be done. And the challenge is, no, it's not me first and them second. It's actually me as well. So the two of us together. And what's that? And even if it's one small thing that you can do that day to kind of fill up your cup, because you only have so much energy to give in any given day. And if your energy is depleted, that has such a ripple effect on everybody else around you. And, I think that's, if anything, because that's going to make you more resilient, it's going to make you more tolerant, it's going to make you more patient. And, a great phrase that I heard that a friend of mine said is, what does my best look or feel like today? And I think that that's important, because your best day, your energy tank might be at 40% today. And yesterday it was at 80%. Okay, but today, what does the 40% look like? And that's okay. Yeah, so there's been lots there.
Yeah, that's just fascinating. And I have a gratitude list that I write out every night before I go to bed, about, you know, how my day was blessed, and look at the positive things. So actually, it's interesting that I don't focus on my parenting. So actually, I should pull out 1 or 2 positive things that I did that day
Yeah.
that was really positive in my parenting, and I think that would really help me. I
And
think.
I'd even go as far to say, even if you did flip your lid, right? I often talk about flip, you know, taking Dr. Daniel Siegel, often talk about flipping our lid. Even if you did flip your lid, but you were able to hold on a bit longer, that's still a win in my books, right? And maybe then I apologized, or I've now, do you know what? I flipped my lid. Tomorrow I'm going to make it a point to actually repair that. I'm going to go back to my daughter. I'm going to talk about that, because I think that's often something that we miss on a real connected opportunity there. Sorry, I'm kind of digressing here, but you know, there is always an opportunity for a do-over. So even if you had a big blowout a couple of months ago and it's still on your mind, nothing stops you from bringing that up now. And actually, it's really important that we do, because it helps children make sense of the story within their mind. It also, when we can take some time to talk about what those feelings were, you know, what was happening for you, this was happening for me. And look, even though that happened wasn't good, here we are, you know, we're working through it. So it's helping them to structure that and work through those big feelings, even though it's not in the moment. You know, so, but yeah, definitely going back to the pin, like that evidence-less care. What am I doing? Little things.
And how can we get children to talk about their emotions? How do we get them to identify their emotions? I've got these mood cards. What's your advice on how to use them?
I mean, I like prompts. I often with kids, something like mood cards, to be fair, I've not actually had a pack of mood cards. I don't quite know. Is it just that they've got different emotions on them?
And they just explain the emotions.
I mean, what I would do is I'd bring myself into this. So, because often children, especially children that might not want to talk about their feelings, and just because they don't want to talk about it, it's kind of like teenagers. You know, teenagers can sometimes, like, you know, and I've delivered sessions to them, I'm like, they did not take anything in and they were not interested. But then I hear later on, actually, they've applied all the tools. I'm like, oh, so you were listening to what I was saying, right? And I remember this at school as well as a teacher. So I would say, make it about you. I mean, or, you know, if you've got storybooks that you read with kids, there's a really good book, I think it's called Visiting Feelings, or Feeling Visitors, and it really is, like, it's just a storybook about just different feelings and what color they are, like, and, you know, describes them. There's also another good one called Emotionary, so that is for slightly older children, and it's got beautiful pictures and then a description of the emotion. So, or the cards, choosing one. And, or even at the end of the day, just, you know, maybe you're helping her pack up, or you're just having a moment together, and you've got the content and you flick through them very, like, you know, casually, and she'll be like, oh, I think I noticed this feeling today. Yeah, I was at the shops and this person maybe said this to me, and I noticed, you know, maybe this person said a kind word to me and I actually noticed this feeling of joy. And actually, if I think about it now, I was feeling this feeling in my chest. I mean, you know, you're kind of modeling a bit to her. I normally start off with, you know, where do you feel the feelings in your body? And, or, you know, maybe something had happened, you're like, you know, I felt really frustrated today. And I could really feel the frustration build up in my body. So, and then maybe open up the opportunity to her. But I would say bringing those emotions in and directing it to you first, or even if she hears you and your partner speak, you know, or other people. And I often say to parents, sometimes it feels a bit of role play, but let children overhear you talk using some of these tools. Well, do you know what, today I had a really tough day and I felt so overwhelmed, and, you know, my boss was saying this, this person was saying this, and I could feel myself. But then I just use that breathing strategy that I've been learning. So get your children to hear you say these things and do these things. So that would be my, you know, my advice, to maybe turn it on you first. Other options as well, you know, often I help kids explore what are the feelings that hide under my angry mask, because anger is that secondary emotion, and we've got those more like vulnerable feelings underneath, such as fear, worry, disappointment, you know, loneliness, jealousy. So often I say, like, when they're watching stories or reading books and the character gets angry, directly, what do you think might be under his angry mask? What do you think he might be feeling? And that's another way to kind of open up that conversation.
So helpful. Thank you. I think the biggest thing for me from this conversation is about the compassion, but just in any other aspect of my life, I just have a continuous feedback loop and want to improve and, looking for ways. But when it comes to parenting, I want to do that, but I just internalize it all and don't have the same compassion and seek feedback and, apologize. And it's really powerful. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. And one of the things I will say is your child's job is to press your buttons and, like, in terms of pushing the boundaries, right? And they will be upset with you. You're not going to make them happy all the time. And that's not a reflection on you as the parent or that you're doing anything wrong, because they do have big feelings because they're learning how to express these feelings. It's their brain, that emotional hub of the brain is far more advanced and developed than the logical, rational thinking part. And they don't have those skills to regulate. So we can very easily take it quite personally and think, oh my gosh, they hate me and they just prefer my husband, they don't prefer me, and like I'm the worst mom, and they say they don't want to be here, like all these horrible things that kids say. But that's always a sign that they are feeling, misunderstood and alone and overwhelmed in their big feelings. And they don't have the skills to help them. And it's not about me or my parenting or, that I'm a bad mum or a bad dad.
Yeah, absolutely. Natalie, I think after this conversation, all our listeners are going to want to find you and speak to you and get more insights from you. How can they find you?
Yeah, sure. So obviously on LinkedIn, Natalie Costa, my website as well, powerthoughts.co.uk. I'm also active on Instagram. So my handle there is at powerthoughts, N for Natalie, C for Costa. So powerthoughts NC. So yeah, all of those good places online.
Thank you. And I know, Heidi, you'll want to close this off as well. It's just been an incredible conversation. I've taken loads from it personally. And I know our listeners will as well. So thank you so much. And Heidi.
There's so much to think about, just so helpful. I have a lot of homework to do, and I'm going to be listening back to this podcast I don't know how many times, but it's been really, really helpful. And I'm really inspired by you, Natalie, and everything that you've taught us today. It's really powerful, and I think a lot of parents are going to benefit from this podcast. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure. So thank you for having me.
Thank you.